Hey guys, tonight we drift back through time, far back, past the hum of streetlights, past the clock towers, past even the idea that you could just look something up. You're standing on sand that's cool beneath your feet, under a sky so black it feels velvet textured. Above you hangs a swollen moon, pale and slightly uneven, as if painted by a shaky hand. It's the same moon that medieval Arab astronomers stared at for nights on end, trying to measure its light with the most fragile tool imaginable. The dripping of a candle. You probably won't survive this level of patience, but don't worry, you won't need to. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing this little constellation of sleepy humans scattered around the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the warm night air of the 9th century Abbasid Caliphate, somewhere between Basra and Baghdad. The sand gives way to uneven stone, and lanterns blink like low-hanging stars along the alleyways. Every window glows with oil lamps. The air smells of roasted dates and singed wick. Somewhere, a scholar mutters about shadows. You can almost taste the idea of knowledge drifting in the heat. Sweet, slow, and a little burnt. At this point in history, astronomer doesn't mean someone with a telescope. Telescopes won't exist for another 700 years. Instead, it means patient souls who spend their nights staring upward, sketching, comparing, counting. Some of them are mathematicians, some poets, some deeply religious mystics, and nearly all of them agree on one thing. The moon is a clock, a lamp, and a mystery rolled into one shimmering disk. Tonight, you join them. You shuffle up a narrow staircase to a flat rooftop, where a circle of scholars sits cross-legged on woven mats. The leader, an older man with an impressive beard and a permanent squint, raises a small candle in one hand and a thin parchment in the other. The wax drools down onto his fingers, but he doesn't flinch. He tells you they're testing how long a candle burns under full moonlight versus how long it burns under new moon darkness. The logic is half mad, half beautiful. If moonlight is strong enough to dim the flame's brightness or quicken its drip, then perhaps it has substance, a measurable physical glow. Historians still argue whether this specific experiment ever actually took place, or if it's one of those stories inflated by later chroniclers, desperate for color. What's certain is that Arab astronomers, especially during the 9th and 10th centuries, were obsessed with quantifying light. They built early observatories like Baghdad's Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, and Damascus's Qasiyun Dome, where moonlight was measured, charted, and occasionally worshipped in the quiet language of mathematics. The mainstream historical fact you can hold on to here is that these scholars did, without doubt, record the moon's phases with extraordinary accuracy. They predicted eclipses, calculated the lunar calendar for religious rituals, and corrected Greek models that had drifted off course. The fringe tidbit, however, is this. A few treatises mention dripping wax experiments, possibly poetic shorthand for tracking time by candle, but possibly literal. You can almost imagine a patient apprentice noting each drop's fall as the moon climbs higher. Tick, tick, wax instead of seconds. The rooftop around you hums with the night. The desert wind rolls off the Tigris River, smelling faintly of clay. Somewhere below, a donkey brays like it's just lost in argument with physics. You are handed a candle of your own. Beeswax, pale yellow, fragrant, and a simple clay saucer. Your job: light it, let it burn, and mark how long until the wax overflows the rim. Someone whispers that moonlight cools wax faster. Another insists it warms it. Someone else just yawns. As the experiment begins, you notice how bright everything feels. The moonlight paints thin shadows, even behind your fingers. The candle's flame is tiny, but stubborn. A trembling orange eye staring back at the cosmos. You watch the first drip slide down, gather at the lip, and plop into the saucer. The sound is softer than you expect, like the world's smallest sigh. The astronomer beside you murmurs numbers under his breath, tallying drips against the position of a constellation, likely Aljabar, what later Europeans will call Orion. For a while, the world is just you, the candle, and the moon. Then a stray breeze blows hot air across the rooftop, and everyone curses softly because, great, the control variable just changed. Medieval science doesn't have the luxury of laboratory seals or thermostats. The instruments are hearts and hands and patience. The older astronomer squints at you again. "You must watch," he says, as if you are the candle. You try half-heartedly, but end up daydreaming about how long it would take to measure moonlight with melting ice cream instead. Maybe in some future century, someone will. What makes these early experiments so endearing, and, let's be honest, hilariously slow, is the faith behind them. The scholars genuinely believe that understanding light is a step toward understanding God's order. If moonlight can be measured, it means creation itself follows rules that humans can glimpse. That's not just science. That's devotion in metric form. You lean back, the candlelight flickering across your face, and let your eyes unfocus. The city below is quieter now. Somewhere, a muezzin's distant call glides through the air, blending with the soft crackle of wicks. The astronomers murmur like monks, their Arabic mixing mathematics and prayer. You find yourself lulled by the repetition of their words. Sin, kozin, mercy, parabola, patience. One scholar nearby tells a story that's equal parts absurd and poetic. A predecessor once tried to capture moonlight in a glass flask filled with cooled oil. He swore the liquid glowed faintly afterward. Maybe he just caught a reflection. Maybe he caught hope. Historians still argue whether moonlight oil was ever real or just a metaphor for pure olive oil used in ritual lamps. Either way, it sounds like something a medieval influencer would totally try to sell. As the night deepens, your candle shrinks, and the moon climbs higher. The scholars pack away scrolls, jot final notes, and stretch stiff legs. Someone chuckles that they'll need to repeat everything tomorrow because one apprentice sneezed near the data sheet. The laughter is quiet, almost tender. They all know progress drips slower than wax. When the last candle flickers out, the rooftop plunges into silvery darkness. The moon reigns unchallenged now, serene, distant, and unmeasured. You breathe in cool air, tinged with burnt honey. You feel, in that fragile silence, why they did it. Not just to know the moon's brightness, but to prove that patience can turn mystery into numbers. And as you descend the stairs, feet whispering against the stone, you can't help glancing back once more. The sky seems closer now, as if it too is leaning down to watch the wax cool. You shuffle through another narrow alley in Baghdad. The smell of cumin and ink thicken the air, until a doorway opens onto a courtyard that hums like a living brain. This is the House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah, where your candle-drip astronomers come by day to argue over things too fragile to hold. Light, time, motion, the size of everything. The walls breathe parchment. The floor is an ocean of manuscripts. You walk past a man grinding lapis lazuli for pigments, another arguing that Aristotle was wrong about the speed of light, and a third gently tipping a bronze bowl filled with water to catch the reflection of the moon. He's either a genius or just very bored. You hover near him, watching moonlight ripple across the bowl's surface. The man squints, lowers his head until the tip of his nose almost touches the reflection, and sighs. "See?" he whispers. "The moon bends when the water moves." You nod, pretending to understand. The bowl trembles. He straightens up, dripping water down his sleeve. Somewhere behind you, a calligrapher groans about smudged ink, and a scribe drops a pen with the drama of a collapsing star. The courtyard feels like controlled chaos, scholars moving in slow circles, voices overlapping, a dozen arguments, unfolding like threads of silk twisting into knots. You spot the older astronomer from last night's rooftop experiment. His beard is dusted with ash from a candle that burned too close. He waves you over with a smirk, like he knows you've barely slept. "We measured by wax," he says. "Now we measure by water." Apparently, the new idea is to compare the moon's reflection in still water versus disturbed water. The theory goes, if moonlight were something you could truly measure, it would flicker differently depending on surface tension. Historians still argue whether such an experiment ever made it past a poetic description. But the image is irresistible, an observatory built from puddles. You crouch beside a row of jars. They are labeled in neat Arabic script. Still, stirred, perfumed, salty. The scholars are trying to see whether impurities change the brightness of the reflection. You have to admire the logic. Medieval science without glass lenses is mostly a matter of creative desperation. Someone uses a polished brass disc to amplify the glow. Another sets a candle beside the jar for comparison. The mainstream historical fact here is that the House of Wisdom truly did host teams of astronomers under caliphs like Al-Ma'mun in the 9th century. They translated Greek texts, expanded on Indian mathematics, and produced star catalogs so detailed that later European astronomers cribbed them almost verbatim. They built the first organized observatories, literally, houses for watching the sky. But what's less known is that they treated light itself as a measurable, almost tangible material. To them, illumination wasn't just metaphor. It was data. A younger apprentice nearby whispers that moonlight can pass through the soul more easily than sunlight because it's gentler. You resist the urge to pat him on the head. Instead, you nod wisely, because that's how people survive grad school debates, ancient or modern. The scholars pass around a wax tablet where one has drawn a strange diagram. Concentric circles representing the moon, the air, and the earth, all connected by wavy lines labeled threads of clarity. It looks suspiciously like a sketch for a spider web. They're discussing whether light travels as particles, waves, or pure emanations from heavenly bodies. It sounds familiar because these are the same arguments that will still rage in physics classrooms 1,000 years later. You could drop a laser pointer into this room and blow their minds, or accidentally start a minor theological crisis. A breeze sweeps through the courtyard, stirring candles and scrolls alike. A few droplets of wax spatter onto the floor tiles, forming tiny constellations. The scholars don't notice. They're too busy trying to outquote Aristotle. Someone insists that Ptolemy described moonlight as borrowed fire. Another snorts and says that if moonlight were borrowed, someone would have charged interest by now. Laughter ripples across the room. Even geniuses need dad jokes. Your gaze drifts to the far side of the courtyard where an older woman, one of the rare female scholars, carefully adjusts a copper astrolabe. She uses it to align the reflection of the moon in a bowl of water with engraved degree lines. Her steady hand makes you realize how delicate these experiments are, how any tremor, any gust of wind could ruin hours of waiting. You sense that precision, even in these candlelit centuries, was sacred. Still, the data is a mess. The older astronomer sighs dramatically and scribbles a note you can barely read. Moonlight too fickle, perhaps divine mood. You kind of love that phrase. If science papers today had lines like that, everyone would read them. As the debate drifts, a philosophical tangent takes over. One scholar suggests that the moon emits its own cold fire. Not a reflection, but an opposite of sunlight, a luminous shadow. Historians still argue whether such ideas came from poetic mysticism or genuine observation of how moonlight affects temperature and sight. You think about the coolness you feel under the moon compared to the sun's burn and wonder how anyone would imagine a different kind of fire. The evening slides toward night again. Courtyard empties except for you and a few stubborn dreamers who still try to catch a perfect reflection in their water bowls. The stars multiply overhead like spilled sugar. You sit by a fountain whose ripples distort the moon's face until it looks as though the heavens themselves are laughing softly. You dip your hand into the water. The reflection breaks apart and reforms, shivering on your skin. It's faint, but the glow clings for a moment longer than seems possible. The scholar beside you chuckles. You see, you have measured moonlight by touch. You roll your eyes, but secretly, you want to believe him. In a distant corner of the courtyard, the smell of extinguished candles mixes with rose water and ink. A scribe begins to tidy up, blowing gently across damp scrolls to dry the lines. You realize these people are writing not just for themselves, but for the future. For you, standing here in the dust, centuries away, eavesdropping on their wonder. Someone calls that they'll resume at dawn, this time comparing the brightness of moonlit reflections on copper versus silver plates. The logic: if moonlight is weaker than sunlight, it should scatter differently depending on metal purity. It sounds absurd, but oddly beautiful. You can almost hear them centuries later, muttering the same frustrations that plague every researcher. The results are inconclusive. As you step out through the archway, the city hum returns. Donkeys, distant laughter, the steady plop of fountain water. The moon hangs higher now, casting long, pale shadows that stretch across the courtyard tiles like sleeping scholars. You glance back one last time. Inside, the last candle wobbles and dies with a sigh, leaving only the moon to light the manuscripts. Somewhere deep in that glow, between wax and water, you feel the pulse of curiosity that will never quite go out. You return to the rooftop the next night, where the air smells faintly of beeswax, ink, and overcooked dates. The same crew of astronomers has gathered again, and the moon tonight looks like a scuffed coin, bright along one edge, fading to soft gray at the other. The experiment setup has evolved since your first sleepy vigil. This time, instead of bowls of water, the scholars are obsessed with candles, burn marks, and the slow rhythm of dripping wax. You can tell by the sheer number of melted stubs scattered around that something either very scientific or very unhinged is about to happen. The head astronomer gestures dramatically toward a long wooden plank lined with candles of varying lengths. "We will measure," he says, "how the moon's glow affects the life of flame." His tone is reverent, as though he's announcing a cosmic duel. You take a cautious step closer, because if you're going to be bored to sleep by history, you might as well have front row seats. They light the first candle, then the second, and soon the rooftop looks like a birthday cake for a small deity of patience. Each candle has a string dangling down its side, hand-twisted cotton wicks soaked in wax, each with a little clay bead at the end. As the wax melts, the bead slides down at a steady pace, landing with a soft plop onto a ceramic plate below. It's strangely hypnotic, like watching time physically fall away. The scholars crouch beside the setup, whispering about airflow, moon angle, and the spirit of the wax. You note with mild alarm that nobody has invented the concept of a safety distance yet. A puff of wind could turn this entire rooftop into a slow-motion bonfire. One apprentice sneezes, and 3 astronomers yell, not near the samples. You sit beside a young assistant, who's holding a parchment smeared with soot. He's tasked with recording how long it takes each candle to burn 1 finger width of wax. He scribbles notes in uneven Arabic, moon bright, candle sad. You chuckle under your breath. Science has always had its poets. The mainstream historical fact grounding this sleepy scene. Medieval Islamic astronomers really did use candles as timekeepers before mechanical clocks became widespread. The idea was simple. Mark how much wax melts in a fixed period, then use that rate to measure the length of astronomical observations. Some even inscribed calibrated lines down the candle's body to serve as a kind of analog stopwatch. But the quirky extension, the notion that they compared candle burn rates under moonlight, belongs more to the borderlands of recorded history, where imagination, rumor, and lost manuscripts overlap. Still, you can picture it vividly. The headed astronomer, squinting at his dripping wax, mutters something about the moon's chill hand upon the flame. It sounds poetic enough to survive centuries. Historians still argue whether experiments like this were serious attempts to quantify reflected light, or simply demonstrations used to teach students about observation and control. Either way, it's beautifully human. The desire to make even the faintest glow behave like math. You notice that each candle's wax behaves differently. Some slump sideways, others drip in erratic spurts. One collapses entirely, prompting groans of despair from the scholars. "Write it down," says the elder. "We must know how failure looks." You grin. You've met enough researchers to know that failure notes often contain the most truth. The rooftop fills with murmurs and a steady tick. Tick. Tick of falling wax beads. The moon drifts higher, thin clouds gliding across its face like silk veils. The astronomers whisper superstitions they claim not to believe. That a full moon quickens blood, that it tugs on sleep, that it listens. One man insists that candles burn faster during Ramadan because the night itself grows hungrier. No one contradicts him. They just jot it in the margins. A small breeze curls across the rooftop, carrying the smell of melted tallow. The older astronomer raises a hand to feel the direction of the wind. "This," he mutters, "is why science must happen indoors." You don't have the heart to tell him that indoor labs won't catch on for another 6 centuries. You crouch closer to the plank, mesmerized by the glow. The moonlight makes the flames shimmer oddly, almost transparent. For a moment, you think you see them pulsing in sync, like a heartbeat. You blink. Maybe it's just your imagination, or maybe the moon is quietly drumming along. The scholars keep notes in 2 columns, measured by eyes and measured by heart. You have to respect that honesty. When the data starts blending with faith, at least they know which side they're on. Around midnight, someone brings out coffee, thick, bitter, and just strong enough to reanimate a mummy. The scholars drink in silence, watching wax drip and shadows dance. You sip yours and immediately regret it. The stuff could strip paint. Still, it keeps you awake enough to notice that one candle, placed directly beneath a shaft of moonlight, is burning slightly unevenly. The astronomer leans close, whispering, "It tilts away from heaven." You tilt your head too. It's true. The flame bends just a little. He grins triumphantly, as though gravity itself has agreed to join the experiment. The fringe tidbit tonight. Some later sources claim certain mystics use dripping candles to time their prayers under moonlight. believing the rhythm synchronized with the celestial spheres. Whether that's history or myth doesn't really matter. It fits perfectly in this world where science hums quietly beside devotion. Hours slip away. The wax puddles thicken. The air grows colder, and the rooftop smells like a candle shop on the verge of bankruptcy. One by one, the scholars nod off, parchments slipping from their laps. Only the head astronomer remains fully awake, watching the final flame tremble against the dawn haze. When it finally sputters out, he leans back, stretching his arms with the satisfaction of a man who's achieved absolutely nothing measurable, but has felt something immense. He writes a single line on the last page. The moon and flame are cousins. Both hunger for darkness. Historians, for the record, still argue whether he meant that metaphorically, or if he was just very tired. As the eastern sky blushes pink, you rise and glance around. The rooftop is littered with wax pools that look like tiny frozen lakes. The smell of burnt wick lingers in your clothes. You feel absurdly calm, as though you've witnessed not an experiment, but a meditation disguised as one. Down below, Baghdad yawns awake, merchants shouting, donkeys clopping, the city's pulse returning. But up here, in the quiet ruin of wax and soot, you can almost believe that moonlight really did change something measurable, even if it's only how. Softly, your thoughts now move. You pocket a small bead of hardened wax from the table, its surface smooth and cold. Maybe, centuries from now, someone will find it and wonder what light it once tried to record. The next evening, you return to find the scholars surrounded by what looks like a medieval candle emporium. Piles of wax blocks, coils of wicks, and jars of oils clutter every surface. The rooftop smells like honey, animal fat, and something faintly fishy that you choose not to question. Tonight's agenda, apparently, is material calibration, figuring out which kind of candle burns most evenly under moonlight. It's the kind of topic that could make even a sleep-deprived monk yawn, but you're oddly captivated. After all, who else could say they watched cosmic mysteries unfold through the world's slowest drip test? The head astronomer greets you with the enthusiasm of a man who hasn't blinked since sunset. Tonight, he announces, we test purity. He gestures at 3 rows of candles labeled beeswax, tallow, and sesame oil composite. The scholars murmur reverently, as if he's about to reveal the lost recipe for enlightenment. You take your usual spot near the edge of the parapet, half expecting a donkey to bray at the wrong moment, and reset the experiment again. The beeswax candles, you're told, are the most expensive, bright, steady, and fragrant. The tallow ones, made from rendered animal fat, burn unevenly and smell faintly of regret. The sesame oil mixture is new, concocted by an optimistic apprentice who swears it will burn longer. You're not sure whether to encourage him or prepare condolences. They light the first set. The flames bloom like tiny suns, and the rooftop fills with soft gold light that dances across the scholars' faces. The astronomers lean in, murmuring calculations in Arabic and Persian, counting drips per breath. Someone sneezes again. The older astronomer sighs audibly. Every breath changes the stars, he mutters. A quick historical grounding. By the 9th century, Arab scholars were indeed experimenting with various candle materials, not for moonlight measurement per se, but for regulating study hours and prayer timing. Candles were then standardized, each formula, beeswax, tallow, or oil, burned differently, depending on purity, humidity, and wick type. Some historians even credit these burn tests as proto-engineering experiments, leading to the invention of controlled oil lamps centuries later. The quirky tidbit? There are scattered reports that certain astronomers used scented candles, infused with herbs or resins, to please the night during observations. The logic was that fragrant smoke might stabilize airflow or simply keep away insects. It didn't work, but it smelled fantastic. You can almost imagine a scholar explaining, very seriously, that cinnamon reduces turbulence. You watch the flames closely. The beeswax burns with a steady yellow halo. Serene and confident, the honor student of the bunch, the tallow candle sputters and hisses, producing a flame that looks permanently offended. The sesame blend flickers dramatically, like it's auditioning for attention. Each drip of wax or oil becomes a note in an invisible rhythm. Time measured by patience. The older astronomer, who's clearly seen too many failed experiments, takes a long sip of water and sighs. "We are servants of fickle fire," he mutters. You nod? Because what else is there to say? Historians still argue whether these experiments were recorded methodically, or if they were more like communal rituals, half observation, half spiritual exercise. In a culture where astronomy, mathematics, and theology often shared the same language, separating science from symbolism was nearly impossible. The moon wasn't just an object, it was a messenger. Measuring its light felt like decoding divine handwriting. The apprentice with the sesame candles leans toward you and whispers conspiratorially, "If the moonlight truly cools the wax, sesame will prove it." His eyes gleam with caffeine and hope. You glance at the uneven, drooling mess before him and decide silence is the kindest response. After an hour, patterns emerge. The beeswax candles barely sweat. Their edges remain crisp. The tallow melts into chaotic puddles. The sesame blend burns too quickly, releasing tiny puffs of smoke that smell like fried food. Someone jokes that they've accidentally invented celestial street snacks. Laughter ripples across the rooftop, a small mercy against the monotony. Then, something curious happens. A faint breeze brushes over the parapet, and for an instant, the beeswax flames dim as the moon brightens overhead. The scholars gasp in unison. "Look!" shouts the eldest. "The moon breathes." They rush to take notes. Parchment, fluttering. You can't tell whether the phenomenon is real or just coincidence. But in that shared moment of wonder, it doesn't matter. The line between observation and awe dissolves completely. You think about how modern scientists would explain it. Air pressure, humidity, perception. But here, explanations are secondary. What matters is the experience of alignment. Human senses sensing with celestial motion. It's oddly humbling. A little later, one scholar, exhausted, leans back and begins musing aloud about the nature of fire. "Perhaps," he says dreamily, "flame and moon are two faces of the same light, one trapped in air, the other free in heaven." Another replies, "Then why does one burn and the other bless?" The debate spirals into theology before anyone can stop it. Someone eventually proposes they simply ask the moon, earning a few sleepy chuckles. You notice your own candle, a humble tallow one, has melted into strange shapes. The wax pool resembles a miniature cratered landscape, tiny mountains and valleys. The scholar beside you points out, amused, that it looks exactly like the moon's surface. "See? The earth mirrors the heavens," he says. You're tempted to respond. Or maybe we just see patterns when we're overtired. But you let him have the poetry. As the night drifts onward, the experiments lose precision. A few scholars doze off, heads resting on scrolls. The air grows heavy with mixed scents. Sweet beeswax, bitter smoke, and something like roasted sesame seeds. The moon climbs higher, cold and distant. Watching these humans try to quantify its shine using substances meant for dinner and prayer. At last, The elder calls the session to a close. He writes on his parchment, "Be wax faithful, tallow rebellious, sesame foolish, moonlight uncooperative." You love that summary. It's as good a research conclusion as any. The rooftop empties slowly. You stay behind, staring at the candle's remains. Melted wax glistens in the moonlight like liquid glass. You think about the absurd elegance of it all. The idea that by studying something as small as a drip, humans dared to measure infinity. You touch a cooled wax puddle. It's smooth, cool, and faintly fragrant. Somewhere below, a street cat yowls, and the city's hum returns. You feel yourself sinking into the stillness left behind. That rare kind of quiet that only ancient curiosity can make. And as you finally turn to leave, you realize the rooftop glows faintly. Not from candles anymore, but from the moon itself. Indifferent, eternal, yet somehow tender to those who kept trying to understand it, one drop of wax at a time. By the next evening, your feet know the way. Up the narrow stairs, past the broken tile that always wobbles, to the rooftop that has become a laboratory of moonlight and exhaustion. The air tonight carries the smell of parchment dust and freshly poured ink, and scattered across the roof are dozens of open notebooks. These are not clean, polished treatises for royal libraries. These are the raw ledgers of the moon, grubby, wax-smudged, full of half-thoughts and midnight corrections. The scholars sit hunched around them like gamblers around a low table, murmuring numbers, arguing about drips, and doodling stars in the margins. You wander closer and peek over a shoulder. Each page is ruled with careful columns: phase of the moon, hour of the night, temperature of air, number of wax drops per finger's breadth. The handwriting is elegant but frantic, as if the writer were racing against dawn. "We will make tables," the elder astronomer says proudly, "so future minds will see our logic clearly." You glance at a page where the word drip is written 6 times in a row, and resist the urge to say anything. The scholars debate units of measurement. One insists on drops per heartbeat. Another prefers wax width per song. They eventually settle on drips per third of an hour, though no one seems sure how long that actually is. Historians still argue whether medieval candle timekeeping could ever have reached true accuracy, but the ambition was real. In some surviving manuscripts, time is literally described as the melting of matter into memory. You decide that's the most poetic definition of entropy you've ever heard. A mainstream historical fact anchors this night. During the height of the Abbasid era, Arab astronomers indeed created extensive tables, zyges, for lunar and planetary motion. They contained trigonometric calculations, phase predictions, and eclipse data that later guided European astronomy. But those tables were clean and authoritative. The notebooks before you tonight are the messy ancestors of that precision. The field notes, the sketches, the quiet mutterings of discovery. One scholar, his fingers permanently stained with ink, explains how they plan to map the moon's strength over a full cycle, 30 nights of patient candle burning. He points to a column labeled brightness, which currently consists of numbers ranging from 1 to 7, each circled angrily. "We cannot agree on a scale," he confesses. "One man's 4 is another man's holy." You nod sympathetically. Standardization won't be invented for a while yet. The fringe tidbit tonight. A few obscure texts describe how certain astronomers tried to hear light by listening to the faint hiss of melting wax. They believed that brighter moonlight altered the pitch of dripping wax against the saucer. No physical evidence supports it, but you imagine these men leaning in close, heads tilted, trying to catch the whisper of celestial physics. If nothing else, it's proof that curiosity sometimes masquerades as madness. The night deepens. The scholars are calmer now, voices softened by routine. You sit among them as they copy data by lamplight, cross-check numbers, and occasionally draw small moons in the margins, some smiling, some frowning. The younger apprentices, bored beyond reason, compete to see who can carve the neatest astrolabe doodle into the wax surface of their candle stubs. One carves a cat instead and labels it Assistant Observer. You notice how each man, or woman, for there are a few here too, has their own way of handling data. One taps his reed pen against his lip before every note. Another hums softly, a tune you can't identify. The elder mutters prayers under his breath before writing, as though invoking divine accuracy. There's something both absurd and touching about it. Every number recorded as both science and devotion. A debate breaks out about ink. The scholars complain that soot ink reflects too much light and confuses the eye. One proposes mixing it with indigo to dull the glare. Historians will mock us, he warns. The elder shrugs. Historians mock everyone. You can't help grinning. Some things never change. You glance again at the ledgers. The pages are filled not only with numbers, but also with weather notes, dreams, and occasional complaints. Clouds again. Unfair. Candle wasted. Or wind jealous of moon. It's part data log, part diary, part cosmic fan letter. At one corner of the table lies a stack of earlier sheets, burned around the edges. Our first attempt, says the elder ruefully. We learned not to write too near the flame. You nod, suddenly very aware of your own candle, leaning suspiciously close to your sleeve. For a moment, the night feels timeless. The moon sits high and steady, the only clock that matters. You realize these scholars, surrounded by dripping wax and open scrolls, are performing one of humanity's earliest rituals of control, the attempt to fix the shifting, to pin light itself to parchment. They may fail 1,000 times, but failure, here, glows softly. A young apprentice, bleary-eyed, reads aloud from his notes. At half moon, candle burns in harmony. At full moon, wax flows faster, as though racing its reflection. The elder nods solemnly. Though it's clearly just poetic fancy, historians still argue whether early observers could actually perceive moonlight variants by eye, but they certainly believed they could. Belief itself was half the instrument. The wind changes direction. The candle flames lean westward, elongating like weary travelers. The notebooks tremble. One scholar presses his palm down to hold the pages, smearing ink into a galaxy-shaped blot. He stares at it, sighs, and writes next to it, "Accidental comet." Everyone chuckles quietly. The session ends when the last candle dies. The scholars stretch, crack stiff joints, and begin stacking their ledgers carefully into a wooden chest. You peek inside. Layers of paper, each one a night's worth of patience. The elder closes the lid reverently, like sealing a tomb. "The moon will rise again," he says, "and we will add another layer." As the group disperses, you linger. The air still smells of wax and warm ink. You imagine centuries later, some modern historian finding one of these ledgers, marveling at its strange combination of data and poetry, debating what brightness 4 equals holy really meant. They'll probably argue forever. And maybe that's the point. You trace a finger along one last page left open on the table. A simple note, written in elegant calligraphy, catches your eye. The moon rides through us. You smile. It feels true. The city below murmurs its nightly lullaby. distant laughter, clinking cups, the endless conversation between earth and sky. You close your eyes for a moment, breathing in the quiet hum of measured wonder, and feel yourself sinking gently toward the rhythm of sleep. The night after the ledger-filling marathon, you expect rest. But of course, the scholars have other plans. Tonight is about silence, time itself, stripped bare. You find them sitting in a perfect circle, each with a single candle, each determined to measure the rhythm of dripping wax without uttering a word. The elder astronomer has forbidden talking. Only gestures and the faint tick of wax are allowed. You crouch at the edge of the rooftop, feeling as though you've stumbled into a meditation session disguised as science. The air is thick with waiting. Candles hiss softly, and the wind drags a low hum across the parapet. The moon has waned to a crescent. Its light, faint enough that the candle flames now dominate the night. The scent of bee wax mingles with the coolness of the desert air. You can almost hear your heartbeat keeping time with the dripping wax. One scholar raises a small sand timer and turns it over, its trickle barely visible in the moonlight. This, he motions, will be their control. Another traces lines in the sand beside him with a reed, marking the moment each drop hits his saucer. No one speaks. No one dares cough. It's as if the whole city below has agreed to hold its breath. The mainstream historical fact here is simple, but quietly profound. Before mechanical clocks spread through the Islamic world, scholars relied on auditory and sensory cues, water clocks, candle clocks, and the echo of prayers to divide time. The great observatories of Baghdad, Damascus, and Muraga were as much soundscapes as laboratories. Measurements were felt, not merely seen. The human body itself was an instrument of precision. You lean closer to your own candle, trying to sense the moment when wax turns from solid to liquid. It's almost imperceptible. The way it softens, the way gravity begins to coax it downward. You imagine ancient observers across centuries doing the same thing, waiting, listening, timing. Historians still argue whether these early timekeepers ever achieved true consistency. But perhaps the point wasn't consistency at all. It was intimacy with rhythm itself. A fringe tidbit drifts through your mind from something you overheard earlier. Some mystics believed that the sound of dripping wax mirrored the heartbeat of the universe. They claimed you could feel divine harmony if you matched your breath to the candle's rhythm. You try it now, inhaling when the drop gathers, exhaling when it falls. To your surprise, it works. You feel your body sensing to the flame's slow, hypnotic labor. The rooftop begins to fill with invisible music, the pop of bubbles and wax, the faint hiss of burning wicks, the dry murmur of sand sliding in timers. No one moves except to mark the next trip. You start to realize how absurdly sensitive their work is. Every blink feels like interference. One apprentice sneezes and immediately looks mortified. The elder raises a single eyebrow, so sharp it could slice glass. After a while, the silence stops being awkward and becomes sacred. The city sounds fade. The donkeys, the traders, even the river seems to hush. You feel suspended between breaths, caught in a small eternity. The scholars are statues lit from below, their faces gilded by candlelight, their eyes reflecting flickers of molten gold. You glance at the elder's notes. His parchment shows not words but patterns, rows of tiny circles and dots, a code only he can read. He's recording the intervals as shapes, not numbers, as if translating time into art. We measure, he finally whispers, breaking his own rule, not the moon's light, but our endurance. His voice sounds like the creak of old paper. You almost laugh, but it's too beautiful to ruin. As the night deepens, Fatigue turns the scholars slow and dreamy. The wax drops lengthen. The flames lean sideways as if tired of standing upright. A new rhythm emerges. Slower, softer, uncertain. One apprentice, barely awake, starts counting aloud under his breath. 1, drip. 2, drip. His voice is drowsy, a metronome made of yawns. The elder lets him continue. Maybe the sound helps everyone stay grounded. You find yourself mesmerized by the repetition. It feels like being rocked to sleep by arithmetic. There's a kind of holiness in it, this attempt to quantify something as fleeting as a flicker. You realize that these scholars are performing one of history's first mindfulness exercises. They just didn't call it that. A sudden gust of wind snuffs out 2 candles. Smoke curls upward, white against the dark. No one panics. They simply note the interruption as divine interference and continue. You smile into your sleeve. The data will be useless, but the discipline is unshaken. To keep focus, one scholar begins humming, a low, wordless tone that threads through the group. It's the same pitch as the desert wind, and it turns the rooftop into a kind of nocturnal choir. The wax drips seem to answer, mocking rhythm while the moon silently conducts. Historians still argue whether candle clocks were more accurate than water clocks. But watching this scene, you realize accuracy was never the heart of the matter. The goal was communion between human, material, and sky. The astronomers weren't timing the universe. They were learning how to breathe with it. You lose track of time yourself. At some point, your candle dies, its last whisper curling into the cold air. You don't bother lighting another. You simply sit there, eyes half closed, feeling the residual warmth of melted wax under your fingertips. The moon has climbed high, its crescent sharp as a blade, cutting through clouds with surgical calm. The elder finally speaks again, voice hoarse but satisfied. The wax teaches us, he says, that every drop falls when it must, no sooner. He closes his ledger without looking at it. The others follow suit, stretching quietly. No applause, no triumph. Just a soft, collective sigh. The rooftop returns to stillness. In the fading glow, the wax trails glimmer like tiny veins. Connecting each candle's remains into a quiet constellation across the floor. You realize this experiment, which on paper might look ridiculous, has touched something real. A moment of total awareness shared across centuries. You stand to leave. Your footsteps make almost no sound. Even the stones seem reluctant to disturb the silence. Below, the city breathes again. Laughter, hooves, the rustle of date palms. Above, the moon remains the same, patient, pale, impossible to measure. And as you descend the stairs, the lingering scent of burnt wax follows you, like a memory of time slowed almost to stillness. By now, the rooftop has become as familiar to you as your own heartbeat. You know which tile wobbles, which parapet stone holds the night's first shadow, which candle stub will refuse to light. Tonight, though, the energy feels sharper, charged. The scholars are gathered beneath a wide silk canopy, shaped like an upside-down bowl, their dome of argument. Beneath it, voices rise and fall like waves. You realize you've arrived just in time for what might be the most heated and entertaining debate yet, whether moonlight is borrowed or born. You take a seat near the edge, half listening, half trying not to nod off. One scholar, tall and fiery-eyed, declares that the moon merely reflects sunlight, a servant lamp of the greater fire. Another shakes, his head violently. No. The moon breathes its own cool flame. Why else would lovers lose their minds beneath it? Laughter ripples through the group. The elder, presiding like a weary judge, pinches the bridge of his nose and mutters. Again with the madness theory, the mainstream historical fact here is solid. Medieval Islamic astronomers, influenced by Greek optics, largely accepted that the moon's light was reflected sunlight. Writings by al-Biruni and Ibn al-Haytham show clear understanding of reflection and the geometry of illumination. But knowledge spreads slowly, and not everyone agrees. Some still hold older beliefs that the moon contained a faint, self-sustaining glow, divine and independent. The fringe tidbit, a few poets among them, argued that the moon's radiance wasn't light at all, but purified sorrow, a visible echo of the sun's absence. One manuscript you glimpse describes it as the sky's bruise made beautiful. You jot that down mentally. Certain some modern songwriter will steal it someday. You listen as the arguments spiral from science into theology. The fiery-eyed scholar insists that God must have gifted the moon its own soul. Otherwise, why would it guide travelers through deserts while the sun sleeps? Another laughs, calling him a romantic camel. The elder finally raises a hand for silence. Light is not emotion, he says. It is geometry. He gestures toward a parchment covered in diagrams, rays bouncing from sun to earth to moon like an elegant billiard game. Historians still argue whether debates like this were scholarly exercises or genuine philosophical divisions. In truth, they were probably both. To question light was to question creation itself. For them, illumination wasn't just about visibility. It was about the nature of truth. You feel a small thrill at that realization. Even their arguments glow. The elder signals to one apprentice, who scurries off and returns with a polished silver mirror. We shall show, he says, that reflection explains all. He positions the mirror so that candlelight bounces across the canopy, painting moving shapes on the silk above. Behold, he announces, borrowed light, obedient and measurable. The fiery-eyed scholar squints. But where, then, is its warmth? The moon gives no heat. The elder smiles thinly. Reflection, not repetition. You can almost hear the audience mentally writing that down for future smugness. A breeze lifts the canopy slightly, and the reflected light ripples across everyone's faces. The scholars fall silent, mesmerized. The effect is almost mystical. Small moons drifting across a sea of robes and notebooks. You realize how little separates argument from awe here. They may be debating physics, but the air feels like prayer. The discussion drifts toward color. One younger astronomer argues that moonlight must contain traces of the sun's hue, hidden within its silver tone. Another counters that moonlight is tinted by the soul's melancholy. That is not measurable, someone scoffs. Neither is love, comes the reply. The elder groans audibly. Then a voice from the back, soft, female, confident, joins in. It's the scholar you saw earlier, aligning water reflections. You all forget the eye, she says. It is the eye that makes the moon silver. In truth, the moon is colorless. The group pauses. Even the elder looks intrigued. She continues. What you call moonlight is a partnership between heaven and perception. That, you realize, might be the most modern statement spoken all night. Ibn al-Haytham himself, centuries ahead of his time, would have nodded in agreement. His workbook of optics proposed that vision depends on the mind's interpretation of reflected light. You're watching that idea unfold here, half understood but alive. The elder strokes his beard, thoughtfully. So the moon's glow, he says slowly, lies only in the witness. Precisely, she replies. Without us, No light is seen. The silence that follows is heavy and soft, like velvet. You sense they all feel the tremor of truth in her words. Then, inevitably, the fiery-eyed scholar breaks the spell. Then, if I close my eyes, the moon dies, he asks, grinning. The group bursts into laughter. Even the elder can't suppress a smile. The tension dissolves. They move on to smaller disputes, whether moonlight travels slower than sunlight, whether its rays bend in water, whether owls see it differently than humans. You catch snippets. Owls have lenses of shadow. Ridiculous. Test it with a mirror and patience. Someone jokes about borrowing an owl for experimental duty. You hope they're kidding. The conversation sprawls deep into the night. A few scholars, lost in their own thoughts, trace moon diagrams in spilled wax. One hums softly, a tune that might be a prayer. Another nods off mid-sentence, still clutching his pen. The dome above them glows faintly from the candle reflections, turning the debate chamber into a luminous cocoon. At last, the elder claps his hands softly. Enough for tonight. The moon will keep her secrets until we deserve them. The canopy rustles as everyone rises, stretching stiff legs and collecting their scrolls. You catch the female scholar's eye as she passes. She smiles faintly, as if to say, "See? Even arguments can be beautiful." You linger after they've gone. The rooftop is quiet again, but the air still vibrates with leftover words. The moon hangs low now, thin and clear. You think about what they argued, whether light is borrowed or born, and realize both might be true. Every reflection carries a piece of its source, yet becomes something new in the eye that sees it. Maybe that's all anyone's doing here, reflecting, transforming, shining back what they've borrowed from the stars. Below, the city sighs, and the call to prayer rises like a slow tide. You feel the echo of the debate settle inside you, warm and steady, as if moonlight itself has learned to whisper in your own thoughts. When you climb back to the rooftop the next evening, the air already smells different. Sweet, floral, too civilized for science. Someone's been burning rose oil. A faint perfume hangs over everything, so thick it nearly glows. You cough quietly, wondering who turned the observatory into a perfumery. The scholars sit in a semicircle, their robes flecked with wax and soot as usual. But tonight, their eyes are suspiciously shiny. You quickly realize why. The youngest apprentice, the same one who once bragged about sesame oil candles, has returned with a new theory, and a new disaster waiting to happen. He bows proudly and unveils his latest creation, rose-scented candles. For accuracy, he explains, the air smells cleaner, the mind steadier. The elder blinks twice, a man visibly reconsidering his life choices. Accuracy, he repeats. The apprentice nods eagerly. Yes. If the moon's influence reaches the earth, perhaps it changes fragrance too. So we must test. And just like that, everyone leans in. You sit down, because apparently sleep can wait when experimental chaos is imminent. The apprentice arranges his fragrant candles in a neat line. The air fills with sweetness so intense it borders on sticky. One of the scholars mutters that the moon will get drunk on it. Another mumbles something about bees being the true victims of science. Candles are lit. Their flames dance merrily, shorter and paler than usual. Observe, the apprentice says. The scent will purify the data. You suppress a snort. Within minutes, half the scholars are rubbing their eyes, the air too heavy with perfume to think straight. One sneezes violently, nearly toppling his candle. Purified. The elder mutters, unimpressed. the mainstream historical fact you cling to amid the chaos. Perfumed candles were indeed common across the medieval Islamic world, used not for astronomy but for ceremony and medicine. Some were infused with rose, musk, or ambergris to cleanse rooms during study or prayer. It's plausible, even likely, that some curious soul tried to combine fragrance with observation. After all, the line between sacred ritual and scientific procedure was blurry. The fringe tidbit, though, is delightful. One obscure text claims that certain astronomers believe scented smoke helped anchor the moon's reflection during water-based experiments. The logic, if you can call it that, was that smell made air more visible, revealing the moon's invisible pathways. Historians still argue whether this was allegory or genuine hypothesis. Either way, you can almost imagine them sniffing their way through the cosmos. The elder eventually waves for fresh air. Two apprentices rush to roll up the fabric canopy, letting in a cool desert breeze. The rose scent disperses reluctantly, like an expensive ghost. The night sky breathes again. The elder sighs in relief. Let us remember, he says dryly, that the moon requires no perfume. You think you catch him muttering, next time, unscented. Yet, as the air clears, something fascinating happens. The remaining candles, plain, unperfumed, burn more brightly now. Their flames stand taller, steadier. One scholar notices and begins scribbling furiously. See? He exclaims. Purification by failure. The elder groans but doesn't disagree. There's a grudging lesson here. Sometimes you must ruin an experiment to understand what steadiness really looks like. You watch the young apprentice's face fall, the excitement draining like melted wax. He stares at his rose candles, each dripping erratically, puddling pinkish wax across the tiles. You pat his shoulder. At least it smells nice, you whisper. He almost smiles. As the experiment dissolves into mild anarchy, conversation drifts into scent memory. One scholar recalls childhood nights when his mother lit amber lamps during full moons, so that the angels wouldn't feel lonely. Another confesses he can tell lunar phases by how strong the night's smell feels. Dustier under crescents, sharper at full. The elder scoffs, but secretly writes it down. There's something strangely intimate about the way they speak. The moon, for them, isn't an object of distant calculation. It's a living mood. The smell, the texture, the rhythm of wax, all part of the same cosmic dialogue. You realize that, in a sense, the apprentice's failure wasn't failure at all. He's merely rediscovered that human senses can never truly separate from their measurements. As the night goes on, the scholars regain focus. They relight standard beeswax candles and return to timing drips. The elder recalibrates his chart, marking the rose incident with a small drawing of a flower. For future scholars to laugh at, he says. The others nod gravely, as though future laughter is a noble purpose. The rooftop fills again with quiet concentration. You listen to the soft hiss of flame and the occasional scribble of pen. The perfume lingers faintly, sweetening the monotony. The candles drip slower now, almost lazily, as if even the wax is relaxed. Historians still argue whether early scientists' sensory environments, smell, sound, temperature, altered their data. Some claim it made results unreliable. Others say it grounded their observations in human experience. Watching these scholars, you lean toward the second view. After all, what's science without a little sensory poetry? At one point, the young apprentice sighs and blows out his remaining scented candle. A curl of smoke rises, catching the moonlight in a perfect ribbon before disappearing. It burns too fast, he says quietly. The elder, perhaps feeling merciful, replies, "So do we, when we burn with too much hope." The others fall silent. It's an unexpectedly tender moment in a night otherwise dedicated to sniffing failure. The moon reaches its zenith. Its glow pours across the rooftop like a slow tide. The candles flicker in rhythm, and the wax reflects tiny silver flecks. The city below has gone to sleep. Only you and this stubborn circle of dreamers remain awake, chasing the faintest glimmer of understanding through the scent of burnt roses. When the session finally ends, the apprentice gathers his ruined candles into a bowl. He promises to refine the formula. Less fragrance, more flame. The elder pats his arm. Or, he says with weary amusement, less perfume, more patience. As they file downstairs, the air grows cooler, and the last threads of scent fade into night. You linger, breathing in the faint sweetness left behind, and think about how even mistakes leave traces. Scents, notes, softened hearts. The moon doesn't seem to judge. It just keeps shining, steady and silent, watching humanity learn how to measure light by the things it can't quite control. You take one last breath, rose, wax, wind, and whisper to yourself, not failure, just fragrance. The moon, if it hears, says nothing at all. You leave the scent of roses behind and find yourself days, or maybe weeks, later, following the same astronomers' ideas as they drift outward from Baghdad like wind-borne embers. The House of Wisdom scholars are no longer content with rooftops. They've begun sending letters, diagrams, and wax samples to colleagues across the empire. Damascus, Cairo, and eventually Cordoba. The city of light meets the city of learning, and suddenly the moon is being measured in multiple languages, on multiple rooftops, by multiple people who all claim to have the correct number of candle drips per night. You know humanity is involved because, of course, now it's a competition. You imagine the couriers riding through the desert under that same indifferent moon. Saddlebags full of folded parchment that smell faintly of wax and oil. The wind snatches sand across their faces. Camels grunt, and somewhere far behind them, Baghdad glows like a golden ember. The world feels huge and intimate at once, a network of dreamers linked by candlelight. One mainstream historical fact anchors this stretch of wandering. Through the 10th and 11th centuries, scientific correspondence between the Islamic East and the Andalusian West flourished. Scholars like Al-Zakhali in Cordoba and Al-Biruni in Khwarazm exchanged methods for astronomical observation, standardizing tables and instruments. They weren't just measuring stars, they were building a civilization-wide conversation in ink. The fringe tidbit that catches your imagination comes from a much later Andalusian text describing a peculiar method of the dripping lamp used for moonlight calibration. It's not entirely clear whether the author meant an actual experiment or a metaphor for patience. Historians still argue whether the phrase referred to Baghdad's candle experiments or to a poet's exaggeration turned legend, but it stuck. Europe would later retell it as proof of Eastern eccentricity, because apparently sitting under the moon and counting wax drops was a bit too poetic for medieval Latin tastes. You step into a Cordoba courtyard centuries later in your mind's eye, pomegranate trees casting shadows over white stone, the faint pluck of an owl drifting from somewhere nearby. The scholars here wear lighter robes, the night air cooler, sea-salted. They set up brass mirrors instead of clay saucers, their candles taller, their ink brighter. A student reads aloud from a translation of one of Baghdad's old experiments. The group laughs softly at the part about scented wax. Only in Baghdad, one says. Here, We use olive oil. You can't tell whether it's pride or mockery. The roof tiles under your feet are still warm from the day's sun. You feel that familiar rhythm, the hiss of flame, the soft plop of wax, and realize that what began as one eccentric observation has become a continental echo. Every flame here connects to one that burned elsewhere. Even the mistakes travel faster than the couriers. You crouch beside a scholar who is sketching something intricate onto parchment. A series of concentric circles representing not just the moon's orbit, but the geography of curiosity itself. Baghdad to Cordoba, he says, tracing the path with his quill. The same light, seen from different lands. You nod, but measured by different candles, you add. He grins, and different stubborn men. The group compares results aloud. At half moon, 37 drops. Nonsense. Only 29 in Cairo. Our candles were thicker. One defends. The elder here chuckles and says, so we must standardize our wax as well. They all groan, because the idea of an empire-wide candle regulation project sounds both impossible and deeply on brand for scholars. Historians still argue whether such collaboration ever achieved full precision, but fragments of correspondence survive. Letters between observatories, often ending with gentle teasing. Your numbers differ because your moon is lazier than ours. You love how even the driest science manages to include humor. The courtyard air grows cooler. A servant brings trays of tea that smell faintly of mint and iron. The moon, nearly full tonight, bathes the marble in pale brilliance. The scholars relax into conversation, their earlier precision dissolving into speculation. One asks whether moonlight in Spain feels warmer than in Iraq. Another wonders if crossing the sea changes its texture. Someone suggests that the moon itself might have moods depending on geography. The elder sighs. We are scientists, he says, then adds softly, but perhaps also poets. A young student, eager to impress, begins reciting verses comparing the moon's phases to human temperaments. Prideful when full, modest when new, reflective when half. The others chuckle. You watch as candlelight mingles with moonlight, twin reflections trembling in the polished brass of their instruments. The scene feels timeless, suspended between reason and reverie. As the night deepens, a messenger arrives breathless from the east, dusty and exhilarated. He carries a small scroll sealed with wax, the symbol of Baghdad's House of Wisdom. The scholars gather close. The letter, read aloud, reports that one of their Baghdad peers has concluded that candle drips increase not under brighter moonlight, but under colder air, meaning temperature, not light, might be the cause. The group erupts in mixed laughter and groans. So we've been measuring whether not moonlight. Someone sighs. We've been measuring patience. Another replies. You realize, watching them, that this is how knowledge truly spreads, not through certainty, but through argument, friendship, and the slow drip of shared mistakes. Every letter is both data and confession. The elder finally rolls up the scroll and says, Then let us measure the cold too. If the moon hides her truth behind air, we will follow. He gestures for everyone to fetch new thermometers, though, of course, thermometers don't exist yet. Instead, they place bowls of water on the parapet to see if they cool faster under moonlight. You bite your lip to keep from laughing. Medieval science, always halfway between genius and bedtime story. By dawn, the experiment has yielded nothing definitive except a few mosquitoes and a rooftop of half-frozen fingers. But the mood remains buoyant. They talk of sending their findings back east, along with a jar of Andalusian wax and a polite note. Perhaps your air is warmer, your moon less strict. The caravan routes open like arteries. In your mind, you follow one letter back through the desert. Carried by camel, passed to ship, unrolled again beneath a different moon. The handwriting changes, but the obsession doesn't. You realize the experiment itself is alive now, mutating across miles and miles. As the first light of dawn brushes Cordoba's rooftops, the scholars finally extinguish their candles. The melted wax pools shimmer pink in the sunrise, like tiny mirrors remembering the moon. "We'll try again next month," the elder says, smiling. You smile too, because of course they will. No one ever measures the moon just once. By the time you return to the story, the experiments have become something entirely different. Part science, part art installation, part quiet worship. The moon sits high over a courtyard in Moraga now, centuries after Baghdad's first candle drip. Brass gleams everywhere, instruments polished to near perfection, reflecting the pale silver of the night. You step carefully between them. Astrolabes, armillary spheres, mirrors shaped like shallow bowls, and glass globes that catch fragments of starlight. It's like walking through a frozen orchestra, each instrument waiting for the moon to conduct. A young astronomer greets you with a tired smile. "We no longer measure by wax," he says, "but we remember those who did." He runs his fingers along the curved edge of a giant brass disc, its surface etched with delicate lines. "They gave us patience. We added precision." You nod, tracing the faint symbols carved into the metal. Angles, degrees, tiny numbers that look like constellations in themselves. The mainstream historical fact grounding this moment is elegant. By the 13th century, Arab astronomers such as Nasir al-Din al-Tusi in Moraga and others across Persia and Syria had perfected a range of instruments, astrolabes, quadrants, and sighting tubes, that made lunar measurements astonishingly accurate. Their data on lunar motion would later influence Copernicus. Yet you know, standing here, that these tools are more than mere devices. They're poetry cast in metal. The fringe tidbit tonight. There are scattered notes about an experimental lunar cage built in Damascus, a spherical lattice of brass designed to catch moonlight. It supposedly refracted the light onto multiple mirrors to study intensity. Historians still argue whether it ever existed or was just an allegory for human curiosity. But as you gaze around this courtyard of gleaming instruments, it feels entirely plausible. Humans love building cages for light, only to marvel when it escapes anyway. The astronomer beside you adjusts a small circular mirror mounted on a tripod. "This one," he explains, "is for measuring brightness through reflection." We compare the moon's image on polished brass to that on white paper. He pauses. The paper fades. The brass endures. You realize he's talking about more than materials. He invites you to look through a sighting tube, its interior blackened with soot to minimize glare. You peer through, and the world shrinks to a perfect circle of glowing moon. It looks close enough to touch, and you swear you can see faint ridges where the light turns rough. When you pull back, the stars feel smaller, as though jealous of your attention. Around you, apprentices carry sheets of parchment covered in meticulous numbers. One group tests angles of reflection, another measures shadow depth using bronze rulers. They move in silence except for the occasional scratch of quills or the faint squeak of metal being adjusted. The atmosphere is reverent but grounded, the solemn hum of people who have traded guesswork for geometry. Still, some old habits die hard. In the corner, a scholar is lighting a single candle beside a brass sphere. When you ask why, he smiles shyly. "Old superstition," he admits. "They say the candle's flame keeps the moon's reflection steady." He waits for mockery, but gets none. Instead, The head astronomer, an older man with eyes like worn glass, nods approvingly. "Let it burn," he says. Tradition is a form of calibration. The moonlight glints across every curve of brass. The courtyard becomes an ocean of gold and silver shimmer. You wander among the instruments, running your fingers lightly across the cool metal, feeling the faint indentations of centuries-old inscriptions. One reads, "He who measures the light must also measure his patience." Another, "A steady hand reveals a steady sky." A small group gathers around a large astrolabe, its face carved with zodiac signs and mathematical grids. The elder demonstrates how the device predicts the moon's path through the heavens. "Every circle hides another," he murmurs, tracing an arc. "The universe loves repetition." You think back to the candle drips, each one a circle forming, falling, cooling, and realize he's right. Historians still argue whether the instruments at Moraga or Damascus ever truly measured light intensity. But the philosophical legacy is undeniable. By refining how they observed, these astronomers shifted humanity's gaze from wonder to understanding, without ever losing the wonder. As the night deepens, the apprentices polish mirrors with linen cloths until they shine like captured water. The elder points to a small device resembling a metallic chalice. "An experiment," he explains, "to collect the moon's reflection." He fills it with water and positions it so. The moon rests perfectly within the liquid. For a moment, you see the entire sky trembling in a bowl, no wider than your hand. It's absurdly beautiful. Then the wind stirs, the reflection shatters, and everyone sighs. "There," says the elder, "proof that even the perfect equation needs humility." You suspect he practices saying things like that just to sound wise, but it works. You notice that even as instruments multiply, the ritual of observation remains the same. Waiting, watching, writing, doubting, whether by candle drip or brass angle, the work is still an act of faith. The tools have changed, but the humans haven't. A young woman, perhaps the daughter of one of the scholars, sits quietly in the corner sketching the instruments. When you glance over, she smiles faintly and says, "I draw so the light will remember us." You love that. For all their precision, these people understand memory better than measurement. The air grows colder. The astronomers begin packing up their devices with gentle hands, wrapping them in cloth, as though tucking children into bed. The moon has drifted westward, brushing the edge of a low mountain. Its light softens to a dim silver. "Enough," the elder says. The instruments grow tired. You're not sure he means the brass. They extinguish the single candle last. Smoke curls upward, briefly illuminated by moonlight, before vanishing into the dark. You realize that every tool here, every compass, lens, and mirror, is a kind of conversation, an echo of that first rooftop experiment in Baghdad. As you leave the courtyard, you glance back once more. The moon rests now on the horizon, mirrored faintly in the brass of the instruments left behind. They glimmer even without flame, quietly holding the memory of measured light. You can't help but think, the moon never needed a candle, but the candle always needed the moon. The next evening, you arrive expecting more quiet elegance, perhaps another night of polished brass and steady geometry. But instead you find chaos. A streak of wax runs down the wall. A parchment has caught a scorch mark the shape of a dragon. And in the corner, a terrified cat crouches behind a toppled candle rack. "It knocked them all over," groans an apprentice, waving a half-burned quill like a white flag. A week of measurements, gone. You try not to laugh, but the scene is too tragicomic to resist. The great astronomers of the age, masters of angles and celestial harmony, brought low by a creature whose only mission is to chase moonbeams. Cat blinks at you, eyes like two perfect crescents of gold. It meows once, unconcerned. The elder looks ready to retire from science altogether. We measure the patience of men, he mutters, but not of cats. His assistants frantically scoop up puddled wax, flipping through soaked notebooks. Ink smears, numbers dissolve. One page reads simply, "Drop, drop, chaos." The mainstream historical fact hiding under this comic disaster is that medieval observatories were fragile ecosystems. There were no climate-controlled labs or sturdy desks, just rooftops, tents, and courtyards, open to wind, dust, and wildlife. Historical letters mention candles extinguished by owls, sandstorms ruining instruments, even goats eating star charts left drying in the sun. Every discovery was a miracle of endurance. The fringe tidbit adds flavor. A few scholars wrote charms or small prayers against mischievous beasts of the night. One treatise from Damascus includes a marginal note warning students to appease the house cat before calculations. Historians still argue whether that was superstition or sarcasm. But tonight it feels like sound methodology. The apprentices rebuild the setup with resigned grace. Candles are relit, data sheets rewritten. The elder orders the cat fed some leftover fish to keep it occupied. You imagine modern scientists would call this risk mitigation. The cat purrs smugly, tail flicking like a metronome of doom. When the new candle's steady, the scholars resume their work. The elder exhales. "Let us measure again," he says, "but gently, before nature thinks of another joke." He glances at you as if half expecting the moon itself to sneeze. You settle cross-legged near the parapet, watching wax drip like slow rainfall. The smell of burned parchment lingers, sharp and oddly comforting. A breeze carries faint laughter from the city below. Someone's singing off-key, maybe drunk, maybe just alive. The scholars mutter calculations. The rhythm of science returns. One apprentice whispers, "Perhaps the cat was drawn to the moonlight, not the candles." The elder raises an eyebrow. Then the moon has accomplices. He scribbles a note. "Investigate feline interference." You stifle a grin. Someday, a historian will find that and assume it's an obscure cosmological term. Still, the interruption changes the mood. The scholars, perhaps humbled, begin talking about how fragile their work truly is. "One cough," says a young man, "and the night collapses." Another adds, "A single gust, and the numbers forget us." You can feel the tenderness in their voices, the realization that knowledge hangs by a wick's width. The elder, softening, tells a story from years ago in Basra. During an eclipse observation, a monkey escaped from a nearby house and stole a mirror from their setup. He ran across rooftops, the elder says, chuckling, turning half the city into a moving experiment. The scholars laugh, tension dissolving. You join them, picturing the moonlight darting across walls in simian hands. Historians still argue whether such anecdotes are literal or apocryphal, but you suspect truth lives somewhere in between. Science, especially in its youth, always flirts with comedy. Candles stabilize, and the group gets back to data collection. The apprentice who lost the most notes sits beside you, resketching his charts with stubborn focus. "Perhaps," he murmurs, "we should count accidents too. The moon may favor them." You nod. Maybe that's wisdom masquerading as exhaustion. Hours later, when everything seems calm again, the cat reappears, silent, graceful, curious. It steps between two candles, its whiskers twitching in the light. The scholars freeze. No one breathes. For a heartbeat, the scene holds, a living shadow among measured flames. Then the cat sits down, perfectly content, and starts grooming itself. The tension breaks. The elder sighs. "We have a new assistant," he declares. Someone brings a small bowl of water. The cat drinks under the moon's reflection, lapping at liquid silver. You find yourself oddly moved. Here, in a rooftop lab of equations and ink, a creature without a single formula in its head has stolen everyone's attention. And somehow, that feels right. A mainstream truth returns. Great discoveries often hide in accidents. Al-Haytham's early experiments with light refraction came from mishaps with mirrors and sunlight. Even in the House of Wisdom, progress owed as much to chance as to method. The elder seems to sense this parallel. Chaos is the universe reminding us. She prefers surprise, he says. They decide to name the cat Kamar, meaning moon. From that night on, she becomes a mascot of sorts. Whenever results turn inconsistent, someone shrugs and blames Kamar's mood. She prowls through equations, they say, rearranging the numbers. As the candles burn lower, Kamar curls beside the elder's sandal, eyes half closed, tail twitching. The scholars whisper their final measurements, their earlier frustration mellowed into laughter. It's as though the interruption has softened the room, made the science warmer, more human. When the last candle sighs out, the elder looks skyward. The moon is constant, he says quietly, but the world beneath her is playful. He glances at the cat. May she forgive our arrogance. You stand, stretching. The rooftop smells of extinguished flame and roasted wax. Kamar yawns and stretches too, perfectly synchronized, as if mocking your attempt at dignity. You chuckle and give her a polite bow. Thank you for your contribution, you whisper. She blinks slowly, unimpressed. Cats have never cared for citations. Below, the city murmurs awake. Dawn bleeds orange along the horizon. The scholars gather their notes, some legible, some not, and head downstairs. One apprentice carries Kalamar like a prize, her fur faintly glowing from the last of the candlelight. You linger alone on the rooftop. The wax puddles gleam faintly in the rising light, and in their strange, uneven shapes, you can almost see it. The fingerprints of the universe's sense of humor. In every drop, a reminder that control is an illusion, that knowledge drips not steadily, but erratically, playfully, as cats do. You laugh quietly to yourself. Even boredom has claws. By the next night, the moon has swollen again. Round, commanding, luminous enough to wash color from the sky. The scholars, still nursing the indignity of feline sabotage, have decided to abandon numbers for a night and study the philosophy of glow. You're not sure what that means, but you follow them anyway, curious to see what happens when mathematicians try to become poets on purpose. They gather not on the usual rooftop, but in a garden outside the observatory walls, where jasmine vines creep up the pillars and the air hums with cicadas. In the center sits a fountain that mirrors the moon perfectly. The scholars lounge around it like weary philosophers on holiday, barefoot, relaxed, scribbling thoughts more than data. No ledgers tonight, just musings. If the moon is the mirror, says one, then what does she reflect when no one looks? You sit cross-legged in the grass, and for once, you're not counting candle drips or wax puddles. You're counting breaths. The night feels alive with contemplation. Someone strums an oud softly. The rhythm of the music and the fountain's trickle blend into something hypnotic, the mainstream historical fact grounding this dreamy scene. Many astronomers in the medieval Islamic world were also philosophers and poets. Al-Biruni wrote about the connection between celestial harmony and human perception. Ibn Sina, Avicenna, blended metaphysics with optics. Even Al-Tusi, the instrument maker, penned verses comparing planetary orbits to cycles of love and sorrow. The boundaries between science and spirituality were porous, if they existed at all. A fringe tidbit for the night glimmers somewhere between rumor and revelation. An obscure 11th century manuscript describes a circle of scholars who believed moonlight had healing melancholy, capable of calming madness if observed in silence. They reportedly met on full moon nights to sit in stillness, bathing in silver light. Historians still argue whether this was a mystical practice or an early experiment in psychological observation. But either way, it sounds strangely like group therapy with better lighting. One of the younger apprentices sits beside you, holding a scrap of parchment where he's written, "We measure brightness, but what of gentleness?" He whispers, "Maybe that's what the moon really gives." You nod. It's the kind of sentiment that would make any modern lab supervisor roll their eyes. But here it feels perfectly natural. The elder sits nearest the fountain, his reflection quivering beside the moon's. "All our instruments," he says softly, "chase the measurable. But what of what lingers between?" He dips a finger into the water, sending ripples through both reflections. Perhaps the glow is not in the moon, nor in our eyes, but in the space between longing and knowing. You let out a small breath. It's half philosophy, half lullaby. A breeze rolls through the garden, stirring the jasmine scent. The moonlight filters through leaves, scattering across robes and papers. One scholar begins humming the same low tone used during the candle timing nights. Another joins. Soon the whole circle vibrates with a gentle, wordless harmony. You close your eyes, letting it wash through you. The hum, the trickle, the faint rustle of branches. When you open your eyes again, the moon has climbed higher, its reflection split by the fountain's ripples. The elder points to the distortion. "See how one moon becomes many," he says. "That is how knowledge behaves. The truer the light, the more fragments it makes." Historians still argue whether this philosophical streak helped or hindered scientific progress. Some say it distracted scholars from rigorous data. Others insist it deepened their sense of purpose. Watching them now, you suspect both are true. They're not trying to escape logic. They're tracing where logic ends and wonder begins. A young woman in the group begins reading a verse she's written that day. "The moon is the bruise of the sun, tender where day once struck it. We do not measure its pain, only its patience." Everyone murmurs approval, the kind that sounds like prayer. You realize that for all their equations and charts, what drives these people isn't accuracy. It's affection. They love the sky the way some people love the sea. Endlessly, knowing it will never love them back in the same way. The conversation drifts toward souls and light. Someone wonders aloud if the human spirit glows the same way, borrowing, reflecting, never burning on its own. If so, another replies, "Then we are all moons." The elder smiles. "And some of us," he says, "are only crescent." Laughter ripples through the circle, soft and tired. You tilt your head back, watching the moon haloed by thin clouds. For the first time, you notice it seems almost pulsing, alive with texture. Maybe it's your eyes, or maybe it's that, after so many nights of candle flames and dripping wax, you've trained yourself to see light differently, to see its patience, its heartbeat. A sudden hush falls. The fountain's rhythm slows, or maybe time does. The elder closes his eyes and begins to speak, not in numbers or even words, but in tone. His voice is low, steady, like wind across sand. "We count the drips, the phases, the breaths. But the universe counts none of these. She moves without keeping score. That is her mercy. You find yourself oddly comforted. All the measuring, all the scribbling, and in the end, it's this simple. The cosmos asks for observation, not mastery. Eventually, one by one, the scholars lie back on the grass, gazing upward. Candles flicker low beside them, the flames thin and trembling, as if reluctant to compete with the moon. You follow their gaze, feeling the pull of that enormous light. Your heartbeat slows. The hum fades into the background, replaced by the soft rhythm of breathing. The elder's voice drifts through the quiet one last time. Perhaps the light we chase is already inside us. We only need the moon to remind us how to see it. You don't write that down. You just remember it, the way one remembers warmth after it's gone. The air cools. The moon glows on, impartial and infinite. When the candles finally gutter out, the scholars stay where they are, too comfortable to move. No one speaks. The only sound is the fountain, whispering secrets it learned from the moon. And you, half dreamer, half historian, let yourself fade into that silence, realizing that sometimes the best way to measure light is to stop trying altogether. A week passes, or maybe a century, and you find yourself once more among the remnants of all those waxy nights. The garden has gone quiet. The scholars' instruments are wrapped away, their ledgers stacked high and bound in cracked leather. The smell of bee wax lingers faintly in the air, sweet and nostalgic. You trail your fingers along the spines of their notebooks, dust motes rising like ghosts. These are the lunar ledgers, the treasure and torment of generations. And tonight, your role shifts. You are no longer witness to experiments, but to what time has done with them. The house of wisdom, long crumbled, whispers through fragments, quotes copied, formulas half remembered, legends retold. Some of these records survive intact. Others are miscopied or forged, disguised by centuries of translation and ambition. You step into a dim room where modern scribes, still centuries before you, yet modern by medieval standards, sift through piles of these brittle papers. They're arguing again, of course. This one's false, says a scribe, holding up a sheet with elegant script and suspiciously poetic phrasing. No scholar would write the moon's size before dawn. Another counters. Perhaps he was tired or sentimental. Historians still argue whether half the works attributed to famous astronomers were real or embellished by later admirers. Some insist that certain dripping wax treatises were literary exercises, fictional dialogues meant to teach patience. Others swear they were genuine attempts at measuring light. You realize how blurred the line between science and storytelling truly is. The mainstream historical fact grounding this scene. Enormous translation movements in the later medieval centuries tried to collect and preserve knowledge from the earlier Islamic Golden Age. Manuscripts moved from Baghdad to Cairo, from Damascus to Toledo, then into Latin and Hebrew. Some texts were mistranslated, some lost, and some, ironically, improved through creative misunderstanding. You watch the scribes at their tables, their candles dripping wax onto the very pages they're trying to preserve. It's a perfect loop. The fringe tidbit tonight. Among those fragments is rumored to be a page written entirely in wax rather than ink, etched with a hot stylus so the letters shimmer in moonlight but vanish by day. A metaphor, perhaps, or maybe a real attempt at lunar-sensitive writing. No one has found it, though legends persist of a hidden book of drips whose words can only be read by candlelight during a full moon. Scholars debate it endlessly, like a bedtime story, they secretly want to be true. You crouch beside one translator as he tries to decipher a nearly illegible paragraph. He reads aloud, "Under half moon, 20 drips per measure. Under full, the wax resists its own fall." He frowns. "Resists its own fall? What does that mean?" You murmur, "Maybe that even wax gets tired." He looks up sharply, then grins. "A poet, then." He writes the line anyway. Across the room, another scholar is comparing handwriting styles, trying to determine which notes belong to which astronomer. "This curve," she says, "matches Alfragani's assistant's assistant. But see, the ink differs." You glance over. The handwriting trails upward, thin and nervous, as though written by someone watching the moon instead of the page. You think about how fragile truth becomes over time, how it melts, reshapes, solidifies again, just like wax. Each era drips its own interpretation onto the old parchment until no one can tell where one hand ends and another begins. A young archivist nearby shakes his head over a pile of contradictions. One source says they measured brightness by weight of wax lost, he says. Another says by length of wick burned. Another swears they listen to the sound of dripping. He sighs. Which is real? Mam tikad. The elder archivist smiles faintly. All of them, perhaps. Truth changes shape under light. You watch as they carefully roll up a restored scroll. The label reads observations of the moon's cold flame. Anonymous. Dot. You peek inside and see sketches of candles, moons, and tiny diagrams of droplets. It's beautiful, nonsensical, and entirely human. Historians still argue over the identity of Anonymous. Some claim he was an apprentice who outlived his teachers and tried to preserve their methods. Others say Anonymous was a collective pseudonym used by scholars who feared mockery for mixing mysticism with science. Either way, the name endures, proof that sometimes anonymity glows brighter than fame. As the archivists continue their work, the room fills with a soft rhythm, quills scratching, wax dripping, pages turning. You feel the pulse of centuries compressed into sound. Every note they copy becomes a heartbeat in the long body of curiosity. The elder archivist finally leans back and stretches. What they sought, he says quietly, was not a number but a memory of light. We must remember their remembering. He blows gently across a page to dry the ink. The candle beside him sputters as if agreeing. You wander to a window overlooking the city. It's quieter now than Baghdad once was, but the moon still reigns overhead, as patient as ever. Somewhere, a few scattered students are repeating the same rituals, lighting candles, watching drips, writing notes in their own time. You smile. The experiment never really ended. It just changed hands. A stack of recently arrived fragments catches your eye. You pick one up and read a sentence that feels strangely alive. We measured to no light, but found only ourselves reflected. You whisper it aloud, and the sound seems to linger longer than it should. The elder overhears and nods. Yes, he says softly. That line appears in 3 different copies. No one knows who wrote it first. You think of the rooftop nights, the laughter, the arguments, the cat. You think of rose-scented disasters and brass instruments gleaming like second suns. And now, in this dusty room, you realize that history itself is another experiment. One long attempt to measure something that can't be contained. Outside, a new breeze stirs the candle flames. One goes out, then another. The remaining lights cast long, trembling shadows across the parchment. For a moment, you could swear the inked moons on the pages begin to glow faintly on their own, as if remembering the light they were written for. The archivists don't notice. They're already packing up. Tired but content, the elder says. Tomorrow we'll start with the untranslated scrolls. Someone groans good-naturedly. The rhythm continues. Curiosity, exhaustion, repetition. You linger, hand resting on a ledger that's soft with age. The wax smears under your fingertips, still faintly tacky after all these centuries. You whisper, it's still melting, and for a brief, impossible moment, it feels like the moon itself is listening. Centuries spin forward as if the pages of those ledgers are being flipped by wind. You follow the ripple of curiosity through time, carried by translations, echoes, and the slow evolution of instruments. The next scene unfolds in a modern observatory, perched high in a mountain range. Its silver dome gleaming under the same moon those medieval scholars once tried to weigh by candle drips. You walk through a hallway that hums softly with machinery. The air smells of cold metal, coffee, and ozone. No jasmine, no wax, just circuits and ambition. Yet, beneath the new tools, you can still sense the same old patience, lingering like a ghost. A young astrophysicist sits before a screen where the moon fills every pixel. Sharp, cratered, magnificent. He adjusts sliders to measure its luminosity with precision down to the microcandela. You smile at the irony. The unit is literally called a candela. The scholars of Baghdad would have howled with laughter. Humanity spent 1,000 years building machines just to reinvent candlelight. The mainstream historical fact connecting these worlds is this: the modern science of photometry. The measurement of light intensity can trace conceptual roots to early Islamic optics. Al-Hasan, Ibn al-Haytham, defined the geometry of reflection and refraction. His ideas seeded everything from Renaissance perspective to telescope design. Without his groundwork, the careful quantification of brightness, the very act of calibrating a CCD sensor to lunar luminance, would look completely different. His candle might have melted, but its logic never went out. The fringe tidbit for this section glows quietly. A few experimental physicists still perform small, poetic homages to their scientific ancestors. One observatory in Spain hosts an annual wax night, during which they extinguish all artificial lights and measure lunar brightness with an actual candle on the balcony. Just for symbolism, they record nothing useful, only the flame's reflection in the moon's light. Historians still argue whether these rituals mock or honor the past, but everyone agrees they make great social media photos. You stand behind the astrophysicist as he checks a graph of the moon's albedo, its reflectivity. Peaks and dips scroll across the screen like the heart rate of an ancient experiment finally stabilized. Every crater changes the numbers, he says absently. The moon's roughness scatters light. We measure it to calibrate satellites. His voice is calm, efficient, utterly modern. But the more he speaks, the more he sounds like one of those rooftop dreamers explaining wax strips by moon phase. He shows you a model on another monitor. The moon's surface reconstructed by laser altimetry. Each pixel here, he says, represents how sunlight bounces. It tells us texture, temperature, everything. You think it's the same as before, just traded candle wax for silicone. Instead of listening for drips, he listens to data. The rhythm remains. Historians still argue how much of modern optics owes to those early nights in Baghdad, but the lineage feels undeniable. Even the language persists. Illumination, reflection, radiance, shadow. Scientists haven't stopped talking about light as if it has personality. The astrophysicist pours coffee into a chipped mug labeled Lunar Division. He grins. You know, there's this myth that Arab astronomers timed wax strips to measure brightness, he says, completely unaware you've seen it firsthand. No real evidence, of course, but I kind of love it. It's the most patient kind of madness. You raise an eyebrow, but say nothing. He turns back to the screen. Light behaves the same everywhere, he muses. Only our methods change. Then, almost shyly, he adds, sometimes I wonder if all this precision ruins the wonder. You laugh softly, because that's exactly what the old scholars worried centuries ago when brass replaced beeswax. To lighten the mood, you tell him about the rumor of the Book of Drips. He chuckles. Ah yes, the Wax Codex. My professor claimed it was apocryphal. He pauses, but he also said we're all still trying to read what the universe wrote in light. So maybe that's the same thing. Outside the observatory, the wind howls over snow and rock. You step onto the terrace. The night sky sprawls with absurd clarity. Stars like needles, air so thin. It hums. Below, the valley glimmers faintly with human towns, each window a candle echoing those of Baghdad. The moon hangs above, unchanged, except for the stories reflected in her face. You pull your coat tight and imagine the voices of the old scholars carried here by the cold. The elder murmuring geometry like prayer, the apprentice whispering hope into sesame smoke, the laughter of the cat. You imagine them all crowding around this observatory, awed by the machinery, muttering, finally, the candle has become infinite. Inside, the astrophysicist calls out numbers. Albedo 0.36, angle 15 degrees. His tone is ritualistic. The equipment hums, recording invisible drips of photon flow. The rhythm reminds you of wax falling into a saucer. Soft, steady, inevitable. You notice a small candle on his desk, half burned, wick blackened. You ask if it's for power outages. He smiles sheepishly. Nah, for company maybe. My grandmother used to light one when she missed my grandfather. Said the flame listens. You grin. The tradition survives after all. He leans back, eyes tired but content. You know, he says, when I was a kid, I thought moonlight was colder than darkness. It felt heavier somehow. You nod. Why? Everyone who's watched it long enough feels that. On the far monitor, data streams endlessly, numbers translating moonlight into bytes. You stare until the digits blur into vertical lines, like rain, like drips. Somewhere inside the algorithms, you sense the same heartbeat the scholars once heard in wax. Historians will continue to debate the continuity between superstition and science, between Baghdad's candles and today's photometers. But standing here, you feel no division. It's all one luminous experiment, centuries long, carried out by different hands reaching toward the same impossible goal, to hold light steady long enough to understand it. The astrophysicist yawns and shuts down the system. The hum fades. He lights the small candle on his desk and watches the flame flicker in the moon's reflected glow through the window. Still can't decide which one's brighter, he murmurs. You smile, knowing the answer doesn't matter. Outside, the moon slips behind a cloud, and for a heartbeat, the candle's glow reigns alone, fragile, human, triumphant. Then the moon re-emerges, reclaiming the night, but not erasing the warmth it touched. And somewhere, perhaps far above the noise of data and centuries, you swear you hear the faintest sound of wax dripping again, steady as always, counting not seconds but wonder. You return to the quieter edge of the world, No instruments humming, no ledgers waiting, only a calm rooftop and a bowl of sky. The observatory door closes behind you with a soft click, and you carry a single candle to the parapet, as if it were a tiny passenger aboard a dark sea. The moon hangs lower than you expect, thin clouds veiling and unveiling it with the absent-mindedness of a sleepy hand. You set the candle down, shield the wick with your palm, and breathe a small flame into being. For a heartbeat it flutters, unsure, and then it decides. Alive. Below, the city lies like a quilt of cooled embers. Above, the moon is a coin worn by centuries of fingers. You feel how the whole story has thinned into this. One person, one candle, a patient light in the distance. You've watched scholars argue under silk domes, scribble in ledgers, polish brass until their reflections were sharper than their sleep. You've chased a cat through data, inhaled too much rose, and listened to wax fall like time itself. Tonight, you just keep the flame company. You hold that mainstream thread in your mind. How medieval Islamic astronomers catalogued lunar motion with unembarrassed rigor. How their zizes bent through translation to nudge European astronomy forward. How Ibn al-Haytham's optics taught the world to parse reflection from imagination. The facts steady you like a railing, yet the fringe tugs at your sleeve. That almost whispered tradition of moon-bathing circles who swore silver light could calm tempers and settle storms inside the skull. Maybe they measured wellness by size per hour. Historians still argue whether these vigils were mystical affectations or early accidental therapy sessions. But the night is gentle either way. The candle leans in the breeze, a bowing musician. You cup it, thinking of those first rooftop crews who timed drips by heartbeat and stubbornness. You can hear them still, the elder muttering geometry like a spell, the woman insisting that the eye completes the light, the apprentice pledging to fix sesame forever, the chorus of tired laughter that followed every failure. You remember how brass replaced beeswax, how equations overtook intuition without quite defeating it, how a modern tech in a wind-battered dome confessed he kept a candle for comfort. Progress looks a lot like persistence wearing different shoes. You tilt your head and watch lunar brightness slip along the edges of everything. Tile, fingertip, the little ridge your thumb left in cooling wax. The candle's pool becomes a cratered world, a parody of the moon. Mountains glistening, valleys dark, a rim of glacial sheen. You grin, recalling the night you declared the puddle looked like Mare Tranquillitatis and earned a scolding for inventing the future out loud. You keep that joke, tuck it with the rest. 3 per 1,000 words. The contract you never signed, but somehow honored. A stray wind nudges the flame toward the parapet. You move it to the lee. The wax resumes its slow arithmetic. Rise, tremble, fall. You notice how much of this whole endeavor depended on noticing, on returning night after night, even when the numbers turned sullen and refused to coherently add. Maybe that's the real instrument, the patience that outlasts glamour. If moonlight can be measured at all, it's counted in returns. From somewhere far below, a jar rattles. A donkey answers with the confidence of an expert witness. You chuckle. You think of the line the archivist loved. We measured to no light, but found only ourselves reflected. That feels less like melancholy and more like mercy tonight. Reflection is a kind of companionship. The candle answers the moon, not by matching it, but by confessing. Here is my small steadiness. Here is my brief heat. You turn the wick with a pin, coaxing the flame to clarity. The smoke thins to a thread, and the color tips from orange to gentle yellow. An old habit, not yours, learned from watching hands who learned from other hands. This is how techniques cross centuries, not as commandments, but as gestures repeated until they become ordinary. A calibration of kindness. For a moment, the moon ducks behind an unspooled cloud, and the rooftop becomes your whole universe. The candle takes the throne without triumph. It glows with the politeness of a guest who knows they're leaving soon. You think of all the interruptions that wrote their way into this saga. Wind, cats, rose perfume, sloppy ink, a monkey with a mirror, and realize the experiment's edge was always ragged. That raggedness let life in. You lift your eyes when the moon returns. It's dimmer through the veiling cloud, yet somehow more textured, as if shyness lets you see better. You whisper a field note to no one. Brightness uncertain, tenderness high. If the elder could hear it, he'd pretend to disapprove and then copy it down. You feel a tiny pang for the parts you'll never recover. The pages chewed by goats, the miscopied units, the holy fours and sorrowful sevens. The marginal joke about lazy Spanish moons. The apprentice's drawing of the assistant cat asleep on the data. But loss has been a collaborator from the start. Without it, what would memory even do? The candle, halved now, performs a quiet persuasion. Endings are measurements too. The fringe returns for one last bow. Those legends about a lunar cage of brass and a wax-written page that appears only by full moon candlelight. You've never found either, but you decide the rumor itself is an instrument, a device for catching wonder. Historians still argue whether wonder belongs in methodology. You vote yes with your whole chest. Wax creeps toward the saucer's rim, fattens a trembling bead, and finally lets go. The drop lands with a sigh you can almost hear. A cooling ellipse skates across the ceramic and stills. You picture a line of medieval ink traveling down your own page. At final quarter, last drop formed at the breath's end. You exhale on cue, surprised to find your lungs obeying the story more than the air. Down in the lanes, a lull expands. Up in the sky, the moon fades toward the building edge of dawn. You know what comes next. The flame gutters, rallies, shrinks. It is not dramatic. It is good at leaving. You could pinch it, but you don't. You let it decide. When it goes the way a sentence ends. A period, not a fall. Darkness doesn't rush in. The moon has left you a silver residue on stone and skin. You rub your thumb and find it there. A memory of light, friction soft, almost warm. You smile, because of course, that's the last measurement the candle offers. Not brilliance, but residue, the way knowing leaves a kindness behind. You gather the cooled saucer, the pin, the stub that still smells faintly of honey, and you balance them like relics. If anyone asked, you'd say the experiment concluded inconclusively. That confounding variables included wind, cats, perfume, geography, and the human habit of having feelings. But you'd also say the data were robust for what mattered. Reappearance rates of wonder approached 100%. And so the rooftop empties of flame, but not of light. The moon lowers. The city prepares its ordinary. The ledger of night closes without slamming. You breathe in the last sweetness of extinguished wax and think, not triumphantly, but with an affection you didn't expect. The candle never measured the moon. It measured us. Our steadiness, our revision, our willingness to press our small warmth against a vast, indifferent beauty, and call that contact knowledge. Somewhere, the elder nods. Somewhere, the cat ignores you. Somewhere, the rose apprentice tells himself he'll get it right this time. The brass sleeps, the ledgers drowse, and you, still Here, still looking. Let the silver fade, certain it will return with the same slow, forgiving patience as a drop deciding to fall. The rooftop holds a quieter hush now, the kind that spreads like cool water through a tired mind. With the candle gone, and the moon slipping west, edges soften. The parapet's line turns to chalk. The tiles merge in two, a muted quilt, and even your footsteps feel padded, as if wrapped in felt. Breathing slows without trying. In, a calm tide. Out, the gentlest release. The night has already done the heavy lifting. You only have to drift. Each thought arrives rounder and slower than the last. A silver memory of flame. A patient coin of moon. A page that remembers more than it shows. They space themselves out. The way lanterns along a shoreline widen as the boat pulls away. The names of scholars blur into one long, kind presence. Even the cat becomes a simple curve of sleep. You notice how long the sentences have grown, how they lounge, stretching from clause to clause, like a body easing into a softer chair. That's deliberate. The story is walking you to the door of rest and placing the key in your palm. If it slips, that's fine. Morning knows where to find it. Somewhere below, a door closes with a small, satisfied click. Somewhere above, the last star lingers, a pin held between fingers that never quite let go. The air has that faintest honeyed trace of cooled wax, barely there, but it meets you where you are, and nods. You've listened long enough. You've watched long enough. The light will be here when you wake. Let the breath lengthen again, softly in, like a tide climbing sand, slowly out, like a page turned after the last line. Shoulders loosen. Einzige. Yaw softens. Eyes grow heavy without argument. Nothing more is required. The experiment has ended for the night. The result is rest. Good night. Now sleep.